Okay, let's just look quickly at the. Let's move this over here. Let's just look quickly at the homework. Abigail, did you upload pictures? No. Okay. No, just because it would be confusing because you're in F2. Oh. Okay, that's okay. Who's responsible for these pictures? Oh, well, that'd be a good idea. Let's turn on the screen. Okay, we have loads to cover, so we're going to go through quickly. Do you want to hit, can you hit the light, please? Thank you. Okay. 12. Okay, this is good. This is showing some. This is showing movement, 1/10 of a second. That's good. I don't know who these are, but we're just going to go quickly. These are successful. Why are these a little bit not successful? What's the problem with this? What? Well, look, why is this difficult? Why is this easier to do than this? Because these are kind of coming towards you, so you can't really, you have to kind of jump back. However, she did really well here, whoever this is. Okay, so, is this yours? Yeah? Good, just in time. Great. This was really good. The other two are not as good, but this is great. This is excellent. Look at that. Really sharp. Very good. Excellent. And you again? Yeah? Kol hakavod. Okay, so this, we spoke about this before. This is difficult at this angle because you can't really move with the car. You understand? You needed to have it going straight in front of you. You did it really well with that one. It's okay. It's okay. Fine. Good. Whose is this? Yeah? Okay. It's good. It's gone too dark for a certain reason, which we'll talk about another time. What? Aha, so you need a lot of light, that's fine.
I'm done.
Whose is this? What? Good. Yeah, that's great. Look, you can see everything's kind of sharp here. It's because you shot at 500th of a second. Is a 500th of a second quick or slow? 500 a second is more than relatively. Yeah, it's already in the world of very quick. It's like it's quick. It's quick. I don't know very quick. It's quick. We'll get there. We'll get there. Okay, let's keep going. Good. Excellent. Whose is this?
I actually took this a while ago. I wanted to get very cool.
Look at that. Good.
So cool.
Yeah. Excellent. Very good. Okay, we'll talk. All these stats are going to make more sense to us another time. And whose is this? Yours as well. Okay, so at 250th of a second, we can see that rice, which is getting poured into a bowl, you can actually see it move at 250th of a second. Not quite quick enough. Whereas at 1,000th of a second, very good. It's already become quite sharp. Okay, whose is this? This is it. Still yours. Okay. Oh, so this is where you're going from the different speeds.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And this is also yours still.
Yeah.
Kol hakavod. Wow, amazing. You did great there. Kol hakavod. And this is also yours.
He's in his pajamas.
That's fine. You don't mind. What's your husband's name? This is your husband? What's his name?
Josh.
Okay. So this is good. Josh is now standing in front of a dark. Did you try it without the dark? Did you do straight just with the dark?
I did it straight on the dark.
Yeah, good. Okay. I don't know if we're going to talk about that today, but hopefully. Let's see. Okay.
Oh, you also did it. Yeah.
Kol hakavod.
Yeah.
It's Rivka, yeah?
Yeah.
Rivka, excellent. Excellent. What's it on?
I had to hold the camera because the middle of the roundabout didn't turn. So
What else would you have done?
Because then the camera wasn't actually still because I was holding it. As opposed
No,
to
you have
putting
to.
on flat
The truth
surface.
is, by the way, we're going to talk about this in a minute. Is that the everyone understands what centrifugal force is? When you know, in the Luna Park or whatever, when you spin around that thing, you stick to the wall. I'm talking about because you spin around, or like when you do the lettuce in the when you dry the lettuce, it all goes to the sides. So centrifugal force means that when there's a movement, like in a circle, you're pushed outwards. So the camera actually gets steadier. When you want a roundabout, the camera actually gets steadier because it becomes pushed against your face. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, these are good. Okay, whose is this?
Mine.
Whose? Yeah, good. Okay, that's good. Shows your movement. You put the camera down here. How are you holding the camera?
Yeah,
Excellent. These also yours? Rivka, yeah? Rivka? Ruthies. Tov? Okay, this is got overexposed. Oh, this guy's looking at you taking pictures.
I was getting some really strange looks.
Yeah, just saying, okay.
I couldn't get
Imagine, put this in your mind. Whenever somebody's looking at you strange, think about this. Yeah? I was in a wedding one time in Bustan Abu Ghosh in front of like 300 people, yeah? Been to Bustan Abu Ghosh? So the chuppah is up on a raised platform, like a big block of stone, like quite high up. And I was standing there with my 2 cameras, and I went to lean against the thing of the chuppah, and it wasn't there. And I just fell straight backwards into like a massive thing of like bulrushes, like reeds. Like it didn't hurt at all, it was quite comfortable. But I couldn't move. I was like a beetle on my back with my 2 cameras, and I couldn't do anything. The whole way was stopped. And I heard this, like, as I fell, I just heard, like through hundreds of people, and a guy jumped down, grabbed my hand, and held me back. So whenever you feel like embarrassed, like, just let that run through your mind, and you'll feel okay. Okay, excellent, perfect, amazing. That's amazing.
He did that. Wow.
Wait, who was taking the picture?
He took it. Someone said that he did it by a wedding. So I got the idea. It's like a merry-go-round with like kids going, but it wasn't the one that you could sit. I don't know.
But say them all. Perfect.
Yeah,
That's one of the best ones I've seen.
Yeah.
It's at a 60th of a second. Excellent. Okay. Got louder and louder. Good. This is also good. Whose is this? Excellent. Tahila, yeah? Tahila. Kol hakavod. Perfect. These are the best ones here. This is great. Excellent. Wow. Good. 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 And you're cropping in close as well this time. That's great. You fixed that. Okay. Kol hakavod. That was fantastic. Photo shoot. Whose are these? Good. It's great. It's nicely composed. Okay. Good. Okay. Good. Whose is this? Okay. Nice. Lots of things that you can fix here, but good. It's a great place to begin. Just very quickly. There's a lot of stuff here, but it's very good. You've nice framing. Nice composition. Be careful with the funny light, drops of light. Okay.
How do you control that by moving where you stand?
Yeah, you have to move them. Yeah. Good. You've done quite a bit here on Photoshop on Lightroom, yeah, to bring
I've
that.
just brightened the colours.
Yeah, it's very.
Yeah,
It
they're a
was.
bit orange.
Yeah. Beautiful. You've done a lot in Photoshop here as well, no?
With that one, yeah. That
This was underexposed, yeah. It was very dark originally.
don't know.
It's very nice. It's a nice. Yeah, so that he's I prefer a little more contrast on the boy, but it's beautiful. It's beautifully composed, lovely, excellent. Tov, really good, excellent. This is amazing, fantastic. Careful cutting off digits.
So that, yeah, that
By
was
the way,
one.
ladies, as you get better, I'm gonna get harder. Okay, just remember that. Okay,
I found
so
that was one.
be careful. Yeah, that's you
My
have to be
main
careful
mistake
with
was
little.
Most of my pictures, I'm missing like most of the stuff, like an arm.
Good. So next time you won't. Good. These are all like a little hazy though. I don't know if you're doing that as like a style thing.
I'm
That's
doing
your,
it on Lightroom.
you're trying to
take it
create
out.
your style. No, you can, I'm not
It's
into that
another
personally.
practice.
I'm not into that personally. That's
Yeah.
just me personally. You can if you. There's a lot of people who create filters as their own style, and they like this kind of like bad 80s kind of sheen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know. Some people are into that. I'm personally
I
not
always
into
give
that.
the client the original and then.
Okay, that's
my
fine.
edits.
Good. So careful here, just with his hand here.
Yeah.
Okay.
My
Tough.
question is also, how do you know how much space to leave on top and on the bottom? Like,
Just enough. Not too much.
right, but you'll see some pictures that the bottoms were cut off, but then there's a lot of space on top where.
So generally the rule is that you don't want to leave too much space on top or on bottom. You don't want too much space. That's generally the rule. Let's just look at this image quickly. What do people think? Do people like this picture or not like this picture?
Yeah.
It's cropped too much at the bottom. I should have done it in the lower time.
What's our point of entry? What's our point of entry?
It's creating the tension and hitting the edge of the frame, which she said with kids isn't ideal.
That you have to be very careful. It's very rare that you're going to get the opportunity to use that technique of having things hitting the edge of the frame. It's much more like for a much more advanced technique when you're dealing with like brides or serious people. When you're dealing with family portrait shoots, it's came up never that I take a picture doing this technique, and it's jarring. It isn't correct. This would be better. This would be better with more room on the right side.
So
Yeah, for sure.
The thing is that I moved in front of him, and it was a much nicer picture, but half his shirt was hanging out, and I thought that really ruined the
You
picture.
have to tuck it in.
Yeah. I don't know what I was thinking.
Very good.
What am I thinking? No.
Very good. Okay, don't be hard on yourself. You're doing fantastically. Okay, we're on it's a long road. Believe me, there's no photographers who became fantastic like overnight. No one. Literally, it's years of practicing and thinking and going forward. Okay, can everyone take out their cameras for 1 second? Okay, everyone take it. Can you hit the light a minute, Abigail, please? Okay. I want everyone to get their camera to a 500th of a second. Everyone get your camera to a 500th of a second, yeah? Everyone do that? Please tell me if you've done that. Everyone get their camera to a 500th of a second. You're in manual. Everyone in manual. Okay? I want everyone to just touch their autofocus button.
This one?
Just put your finger on it. Let me just see if you know where it is. AFMF. Where is it?
Should we move it to Emma?
No? You never gone there. You got it?
Yeah, can I?
I think
Yeah?
the setting was changed before.
What do you mean?
No, like it used to be blue.
Oh, I don't know. That we can get into. We'll do it anyway on the top here. We're going to look on the top here. Okay, so let's go to M. Everyone's in
I
M.
can't get to the 500. That's what I'm saying.
On the wheel, should we go to M?
If you're on M, then you'll be able to do stuff. Okay? Everyone knows where the autofocus is on their camera, yeah? Why was what I just said wrong? Because your autofocus is not actually on your camera. Autofocus is on the lens. Okay? There's two completely separate things. Camera and a lens are two completely separate things. Okay? So let's change our aperture to f16. It's a race. What? We're going to change our aperture to f16. Okay, you don't remember we did that last
Is it
week?
this? Is it this?
Yes,
Oh,
good.
What is that? This one. Oh. Can you explain again what that is?
Mm-mm. I didn't explain the first one. This lesson we explained. Okay, that's a loaded question. Like I said, what's Gomorrah? I love them. It's a big question. Okay,
Why saying F? I don't say why F? Yeah.
that's how we refer to it as F16.
What's
Okay.
16 is good.
16, you got to 16? You got to 16? Yeah, good. Okay, and let's change our ISO to 400. Change our ISO to 400. Let's change our ISO to 1600 because I see some of you have it in 400 already. Change our ISO to 1600, did it? You there? You knew how to change it otherwise?
When I use this thing, so that now.
Try, have a think, have a think.
No, but what I was saying, I changed it to 1600, but now there's a clock there.
Okay, that's
So
no
move this.
problem. Who knows how to get rid of the clock? What's the clock? When you see a little picture of a
Oh,
clock,
self-time.
self-time, which is a problem because you'll be like this. Okay, say cheese. 10 seconds, okay?
So now see there's different icons. So
What?
there's one which is it's one picture, and then there's one where it's a
Yes.
bunch of.
Okay, so you keep it on one picture for the meantime, just one square.
What's the other? What's the other?
We'll talk about that. Okay, that's called continuous.
I need to write.
Okay. What?
This is button.
ISO, you have a button saying ISO? You should have.
It's different mine.
ISO. Okay. Okay. Good. Let's just change again our settings. Let's change now. Please say when you've done it. Just say done. Okay. I want 1,000. I want a 2,000th of a second at f4 at ISO 100. 2,000th of a second at f4 at ISO 100. Done? Who's done? Done? Okay, go on. Done?
Say it again. 2000.
We want a 2,000th of a second at f4 at ISO 100.
doesn't go less than 5.0.
Okay, that's good. Okay, sure, I should say 5. Yeah, 12. Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's healthy. Everything's in good working order. Okay, now let's change to, I want a 5-second exposure. 5-second exposure at f11 at 400 ISO. 400. A 5-second exposure. Remember what the difference between 1/5 and 5 is.
Can you say it again?
5-second exposure at f11 at ISO 400. ISO 400. Okay.
Are you
Good.
constantly switching this when you take pictures?
What?
Are you constantly doing this?
I try and do as little as possible. The goal is to try and get as many things set so you don't have to be dealing with 100 things. So I'm trying really to only, in the ideal world, I'm dealing with one variable. That's in the ideal world. Yeah, just
Why
my
would you
aperture.
work with 2 cameras? Is that because of the lens?
Yeah, just the lens. I have the two exactly the same cameras, just different lenses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, ladies, what did we discuss was the problem when you start shooting too slow a shutter speed? Gets too bright. But what's the problem? Like, what's the effect, so to speak? What? Camera shake. Okay, so now just very quickly, if you turn to page 42.
Can I just ask you,
Yeah.
I've got my camera in a little square, I don't know what digital.
You got what's that again?
Like next to the top right corner. Yeah, top right corner. I'm just looking at her camera and it's on 99 and mine is 3.
That's fine. She's got a much bigger memory card than you got.
Oh, see, is that what it is?
That's your camera. That's your picture countdown. Mine says 1999. I've got 1,995 pictures. Okay. So now, if we look at page 42, there's what's called the steady stance, which will allow you to take a picture when the camera goes a little bit slower than what it should do. What did we say was the benchmark of when you have to start remembering that the camera's going to start shaking? When we zoom, but what number? What's like the... So really, a 60th of a second, when you're taking a wide-angle picture, a 60th of a second is the limit, absolutely the limit. Anything lower than a 60th of a second is you really have to be very conscious about any vibrations, even a 60th of a second. The more you zoom in, remember what we said? The more you zoom in, what happens? The more you see the movement. So if you've zoomed in very, very far, like Abigail has this lens here, this is a 300mm lens. If I zoom in 300mm, then I'm going to be having to hold the camera probably at a 250th, even a 320th of a second, as opposed to a 60th of a second, because the vibrations as you zoom in further are registered more. Okay? So when I say that the benchmark is a 60th of a second, it's remember it changes. Okay? It's a sliding scale. So now, what we do to hold the camera steady, okay? The key word you need to remember in regards to holding the camera steady begins with P. The word is pressure. The more pressure you can apply to your camera, the steadier the camera will become. Okay? So number one, let's just go through this stance, okay? The first thing is how you stand. Maybe if you want to move, let's do this. Everyone can do this. We're going to do it quite quickly. Just, ladies, if you just move the table this way a little bit and just stand. Everyone just stand up, hold your camera. Just stand. Okay, so now we're going to just put our legs just slightly apart. You're more sturdy when your legs are like this, when your legs are like this. Okay, so that's the first thing, that's the basis. Have your legs slightly apart. Okay, now just be relaxed, etc. What you're going to do here is you're going to have one hand, usually people are holding their camera something like this, yeah? Okay, so now this way, what we're going to do is we're going to put our hand on here, it becomes like a support. We're going to tuck this elbow into our stomach as high as possible. So this now becomes like a tripod, so to speak. Okay, and now you're going to push the camera. This is one of the most important parts of it, is you're going to push the camera hard against your face, so your nose kind of gets squished. Okay, and in this stance, when you've got your elbow tucked in, your hand underneath the lens like this, and you're pushing the camera hard against your eye, it will afford you a lot more time in regards to how steady you can hold the camera. Okay? And the last thing as well is when you breathe, you should know, and all of this stuff makes a difference, is when you breathe, it also makes a difference. So the best time of taking the picture would be when you've inhaled, just before you're about to exhale. At that point, when you're holding it, believe me, it makes a difference. It really makes a difference. Okay, so you should practice that. It's written on page 42, remember that. Okay, let's move forward. We're going to go to page 46. First things first, what did we define? One second. What did we define composition as? What's the definition of composition? Underlying geometric structure, yeah. And what do we say is focus? Focus is distance. Please just remember that. And what's the problem? Why can that be an issue for us?
Try to capture things.
Exactly. If, for example, go on.
Oh, I don't know, you have like two people, you want to focus on one and not the other.
And the other one's further or closer to you.
Right.
Yeah, problem. Very good. Okay. What are the point of entry? What's the rule to the 5 points of entry?
First it will go to what is in focus. If there's a
That's
person,
the 5 point. That's overrides everything.
yeah,
If there's a person,
it'll go straight to their eyes.
if it's a person in a picture that you can see without being able to recognise their
It's
features,
first the
person.
then their face,
Face.
then their
Oh,
eyes.
that's good.
If it's light, you see the dark, and if it's a dark picture, you see what's lighter.
Yeah, and the overriding factor of everything is the focus. The sharpest point of the image overrides everything. It could be that your eye would be drawn to something first, but your eye will very quickly rest on the part of the image that is in focus. Good. Okay? What is exposure? Go on.
The more open it is, the more likely it will be exposed, and the quicker the exposure.
Wait. You jump forward. You're right. You jump forward a lot. You jump forward. 1 second. You jump forward.
So the more light that's let in, the brighter the picture will be.
Well, just that you're already jumping. You're right. What is exposure? You're already talking about shutter speed. You're talking about shutter speed.
Yeah.
What's exposure?
The exposure where the cameras were real, how long we let the camera.
Right now, we only understand about how long. It's how much light we let in. That's it. How much light we let in is exposure. So an image that is overexposed is
Very light.
too bright. Until what would it be if we ultimately overexposed an image? It would become white. And the opposite?
The black.
The black. So an underexposed image is too dark. Is that annoying for people? I'm just recording it for the lady who's not here. The Seda. If you miss this class, you'll be lost. So we're recording it for your aunt, yeah? Rivka. Leia. Sorry, Leia. I made a mistake before. Sorry, Leia. Okay, Tov. What is shutter speed? Go on. What's shutter speed?
How fast the shadow goes.
How gone?
The longer it takes to close, the more light it's coming in.
The longer it takes to close, that's kind of showing the same, but it's right. Yeah. The longer that the shutter is open for, the more light you let in. Fine. What is so shutter speed's related? You're basically starting to explain what shutter speed's relationship to exposure is. So go on, carry on. What's shutter speed's relationship to exposure? The way that we learn.
The more light you let in, the brighter the picture, the darker, the less light gets in.
Yeah. So the longer the shutter, the more light you're letting in, the brighter the image. The quicker, the less time you're allowing the shutter to stay open for, the less light, the darker the image.
Can I just ask you a second? So by the homework,
Yeah.
you told us to do try the 7 different
Yeah.
It makes sense it came right in the last
Yes.
degree about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much made sense. Very good. Okay.
So can I just
What?
ask you
Yeah.
tool today?
Yeah. Sure. So I'll put it down on the power and if it's still cool, tell me again. I'll change it. Okay. For example, what kind of photography might we be using very quick shutter speed for? Sports photography. And what kind of photography might we be using a long shutter speed for? No, definitely not. Cars, okay, but something maybe a little more like Matsuri, a little bit more common.
Dark location.
Dark location, okay. Better than that even. Landscape photography. A serious landscape photographer will never, you will never see a serious landscape photographer holding his camera. Always using a tripod. Why? What would happen when we use a long exposure with a landscape?
Well, it's just fuzzy or he's moving it.
No, but what using a long exposure with landscapes, what kind of effect? What would
We'll get all the textures and everything.
And the clouds thing.
Clouds could start moving, or what else? Cars, yeah, water. Things would start. Things that are moving in the picture would start leaving because a landscape generally is static. So if you could allow for the clouds to kind of become like a bit, kind of like they're moving, that adds a bit of like dynamic energy into the image. Okay? Like we said, one of those things when we looked at that picture is movement kind of draws us into an image. So
You don't see the movement. How do you see the movement? Clouds.
do you remember the pictures of water that we saw? Where you see the water become like a shape.
That was a nicer picture than almost a slower shutter. Like that's like a more professional picture.
Is it a more professional picture? It's very common that in a landscape picture you'll see the water kind of sheen because they've used a long shutter, and it makes the experience feel like the water's actually moving as opposed to something being frozen still. Hmm?
Okay.
Is there
Okay.
any other times where someone would use a long exposure not there?
Yeah.
Just when you want to capture movement.
Yeah, like you could do maybe in dancing and funny stuff like that. Like you can do, but regularly, generally not. Okay. What is a stop of light? Go
The
on.
measurement of how long photographers measure light.
What's the difference between a stop of light and a gram of flower?
It's subjective.
Okay, ladies, stay with me. What's the difference? What's the difference between a stop of light? Go on, you can answer this now. What's the difference between a stop of light and a gram of flower? Why is stops different?
Stop of light is not a specific amount. It's not
Go on.
like a gram.
Go on. Why? What's the stop?
Depends, it's relative.
Relative. That's the word. That's the icky word. Go on. It's relative to.
Relative to the amount of light.
It's Bailey, yeah. Bailey's your name. Bathsheba. Who's Bailey? You Bailey? What's your name? Brocha. Okay, Bathsheba. So if I was to say to you, give me an extra stop of light, what would I have to do?
Double what you've got.
Okay, so excellent. So in regards to shutter speed, if I'm shooting at 500th of a second, I say, Bathsheba, give me an extra stop of light, what would I change my shutter speed to? Perfect. Everyone clear? No? Okay, so 500th of a second. What are 2 500ths of a second? Remember, a 500th of a second, to double that would not become 1,000th of a second. Remember? A double fraction, like two quarters equal a half. So 2 500ths equal a 1 250th. So we're adding. So that should just say like this: if I'm taking a picture right now at 500th of a second, and I'm going to add a stop of light, I'm going to change my camera to. Go on, how we go? A 1 250th of a second. What about if I'm shooting at a 2,000th of a second and I want to add 2 stops of light? How we go? So I'm going to add 2 stops of light. So from a 1,000th of a second I go to, sorry, 2,000th of a second I go to a, from a 2,000th of a second to double it. What's the double of a 2,000th of a second? 2 2,000th of a second equals a 1,000th of a second. Okay? You have to go back through your fractions again. Okay? So to double a 2,000th would give me a 1,000th, and then to double a 1,000th would give me a. You can do it, you can do it. You think you can't do it, that's why you can't do it. You can do it. What's to double a quarter would be what? So to double a 1,000th of a second would be a double 1,000. That was a 500th. If you have 1,000, ladies, you have to stop. Okay, it's such a small class. I can't do it. If there's like 30 people and you're in the back corner, it could work, but it can't. No way. Okay, if you take a 1 second, yeah, and you cut it into 1,000 pieces, yeah. So the 1 second is now split into 1,000 pieces. That 1,000th of a second is like, just goes like that. And if I wanted to take 2 pieces, yeah, how many pieces would I have there? 2 pieces. So if I got rid of that line in the middle and just made those 1 piece 2 pieces, that would be 1 out of 500 pieces. You with me? So now, if I've got a 1,000th of a second, I want to make that twice as long. I want to double a 1,000th of a second. I end up with a 500th of a second. Yeah? You have to go back through your fractions. You have to. It's very straightforward. You just have to go through it a little bit. I brings it out of practice a little bit. So let's do it again. I'm going to work this out. To add 2 stops of light from a 2,000th of a second. To add 1 stop of light from a 2,000th of a second.
2,000?
From a 2,000th, I want to double the 2,000th of a second to make it twice as long, which would become a. To come from a 2,000th of a second to make a 2,000th of a second twice as long would mean I end up with a 1,000th of a second.
I think I get it. I think I'm getting it, but I have to like.
You have to go back through again. Yeah. Please go back through again, okay? Because you'll do your head in. Okay, and then to go from a 1,000th of a second to a 500th of a second. So what about if we're adding 4 stops? We're adding 4 stops from a 2/50th of a second. 250, then we'd go to what? No, we're adding. We're adding light.
From 250?
Yeah.
Go to 1.
Go on. It's okay. 120 from 2/50th of a second, we go to a 1/125th. Yeah.
Okay.
Now remember, we said something goes funky from a 1/125th, because really we should be going from a 1/125th to a 162.5. That doesn't goes to 160th. Very good. And then to a 160th, to add a non-stop of light from a 160th. Double a 160th. To double it. To double a 160th. Double a 160th. No, it's a 160th. 130th. Ladies, to go to double a 160th is a 130th. And then a 130th, one more. 15th of a second. So you understanding? Yeah? So let's say, let's go. We're right now in an 1/8 of a second. And I want to take away 6 stops of light. An 1/8 of a second. Let's do it together. Go on, I've got 6 fingers here. Go on. 1/8 of a second. So what do we change an 1/8 of a second to? Remember, it's a little bit different. A 15th. Very good. Now. Excellent. Go on. And then last one. 500. That would be taking away 6 stops of light. Okay? 12. Okay.
You can't just question on it.
Yeah.
You're saying stop of light because the measurement is like you're adding more light. That's
Because the picture's taking so fast.
Why is it called a stop?
no. Why is it called a stop of light? What's
Right.
We're either adding light. So we refer to a stop of light being the amount of light there is right now. However much light is right now, let's say we have 30 seconds of light. If I want to take away a stop of light, so I want to half the amount of light. 30 seconds, the shutter opens. I'm just counting seconds. 1, 2, 3, 29, 30. Okay, I let in 30 seconds of light. And if I want to let in half that amount of light, how long do I have the shutter open for? Come on, 30 seconds. What's half of 30? Thank you, okay? Yeah, and now half of 15 seconds. Half to 15 seconds. What's half of 15? Forget the numbers, just thinking. Half of 15 seconds. 7.5. That's why it stops of light. Stops of light just refer to adding or taking away the same amount of light. So 1 stop of light is whatever I've got right now. So if I want to add a stop of light, I double the amount of light. And if I want to take away a stop of light, I halve the amount of light. Or half the amount of light, depending on where you're from. Yeah.
And that question, why is the emphasis on the light? Because when
That
you
is
take pictures and
photography.
you wanna,
Photography
right, no,
is light.
let's say your picture's too dark, so you're gonna change the shutter speed to make the picture lighter. That's why you.
So photography only happens because of light. Photograph. Who remembers the translation in Latin of photograph? Photo is light and graph is drawing. Really. It is drawing with light. You start with a black. So to speak, canvas. Yeah, your sensor or your piece of film is a black, unexposed piece of canvas. Now, your job as a photographer is allowing light to come in and touch that sensor or that film, and that light becomes imprinted, so to speak, on that canvas. So our whole goal, you could think of it like this. You know, kids, they sometimes do they do a colouring, like a multicolored thing, and then they cover it with that black plastilina, and then you can scratch away the black plastilina and you see the colours come through. That's basically what photography is. So everything to do with photography is all about adding or taking away light. Okay? That is photography.
Let's say you tell the person working for you to take away 2 stops of light. So it's not just double, it's 4 times.
So take away 2 stops of light means if we're at a 500th of a second, they're going to go click, click, click. Remember, it's 3 clicks for a stop on our camera.
Not just 250, but it's...
It would not 250. If they're a 500th and you say take away 2 stops of light, what's half of a 250th? No, go the other way. A 500th.
Oh, you're making it dark?
Yeah, you'll take it. So if you take away a stop of light from a 250th of a second, you go to a 500th of a second. And if you want to take away another stop of light, then you go to 500, to a 1000th of a second. Remember, our cameras do not go click and work in full stops, do they? Our camera, if I do click on my camera, it does not go from a 1/125th to a 1/250th of a second. It goes 1/125th, 160, 200, 250. It doesn't go 1 click. So what does it break? What does our camera break it down into? Into thirds. Our cameras work in third stops. The shutter speed works in third stops. The apertures work in third stops. The ISO, the better cameras work in third stops. Flashes work in third stops. Neutral density filters work in third stops. Everything in photography works in third stops. And you're going to see how it all comes together soon, and you'll be, wow, that's really easy and really amazing. Okay? Clear? Any questions?
So you will you'll tell your assistant, take away 2 steps in the picture, you just tell it's too dark?
Well, yeah, but my camera's in my hands. For me to say change I have to hand in my camera, having messed around and give it back. I will say to my assistant all the time, give me an extra stop of light when he's holding the flash. Because on the flash, he'll double the power of the flash.
It makes the picture brighter.
Brighter.
And you're going lower numbers. You're going up.
Yeah.
So that's how
you're going long. It's a longer time. So if you've got a 15-second shutter speed and you want to add 1 stop of light, you will go from a 15-second shutter speed to a.
You're adding more light.
I'm adding. Abigail, you answer this. I've got a 15-second shutter speed.
So 7.5.
I've got a 15-second shutter speed and I want to add a stop of light.
Do you want it to be darker or lighter?
I want to add a stop of light. Add light, yeah, add a stop of light. So I'll go from 15 seconds to...
Not 30. 30 would be different.
No,
Wait, one second. I've got to have a question for everybody. What's longer, 15 seconds or 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay, you're clear? Yeah? Okay, good. Okay, so look, let's just now make the table again, okay? We have shutter speed's relationship to exposure. Tahila, tell me, what's shutter speed's relationship to exposure? Yeah, go on, speak a little louder, you've got to compete with air conditioning. The more light, yeah, perfect. Third one for the strike, what? The brighter the image, excellent. I've said it better myself. And the other side. The less time it's open for, the less light, the darker the image. Clear? Now, what's shutter speed's effect?
As in what? The movement, the light.
Shutter speed's effect. Go on. Shutter speed effect.
On the picture, how bright or dark is it?
Shutter speed effect. That shutter speed's relationship to thank you. Shutter speed's effect is to do with movement. How did we articulate that? The longer the shutter's open for, the more movement we see. For example, cars start becoming like blurry lines, and water becomes like a pastel, etc. Clouds look like that. Okay, and the quicker the shutter is, for example, what could I be using a quick shutter speed for? Somebody jumping, not landscape. No, the opposite. Landscape would be using a longer shutter speed generally to show like more, because it's kind of still anyway. Okay, good. Everyone's clear? Any questions? Feel free to ask questions.
The shutter speed effect is movement, but it's also light.
Yeah.
That's why we said shutter speed has a relationship to exposure, and it has an effect. There's other things with relationships to exposure, and they have a different effect. So we're going to compartmentalize everything into our minds, and then we're going to put the picture in another. This class you're going to see it come together a lot, and then the next class it's going to be like, oh wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And then you're going to be stuck to explain it to anybody else. We're going to become like a secret society of photography. And to explain it to everybody else, you're going to have to sit there again and go, okay, so you've got this thing called a camera. Okay? Yeah, go on.
I was once in an art course, and they showed us like how she took a can and she like made a tiny slit in the can, she put something in it, and sort to show us that like she made a tiny hole, and then she put, I don't know how they used to print out when I click with it, you see what the lines that came out. So she'll show us as well, but the tiny line, and there was only a tiny bit that captured in, and like the big hole, like the whole light that came in. So it's like, this is digital, but like
Whoa, no. Okay, that's a great segue into what we're going to talk about now. Aperture. Okay? Aperture. What is aperture? We've discussed shutter speed. Okay? Aperture, shutter speed is, what is the shutter speed? What is the shutter? Look at this. This is, how long would you think this is? Not 2 seconds, come on. Half a second, close. Half a second, okay? So the shutter speed is how long the shutter opens for. That is the shutter. Goes like that. I'll show you over here. 1 second. Here you go, this is the shutter. Good. Okay. So now that's the shutter. The aperture is inside the lens. You see that? Do you see that hole gets bigger and smaller? Do you see that? You see that? Yeah? See that? The hole gets bigger and smaller. Not a zoom. No, not a zoom. 1 second. Let me just show you this. Can you see this? See the hole gets bigger and smaller? Okay, that is the aperture. The aperture exists within the lens, okay, and it is a hole. It's a hole. What's the difference? Aperture means hole. Go on, tell me another context where the word aperture is used in. Aperture of a needle. You ever heard of an aperture of a needle?
bigness and the small.
Well, the aperture of the needle is to do. What's the difference between the aperture of a needle and the aperture of a camera? The needle doesn't change. That is the kiddush of the aperture of a camera. Is it is a hole that changes in size.
Is the mechanism actually called aperture? Is that the name of the actual mechanism?
No, well, it means that an aperture, just if you look at an aperture, and the aperture of a camera means that. The aperture of a lens means that. But the word aperture translates as a hole. Okay, so ladies, let me just throw a question out to you. What would you think, okay, just out of, ladies, stay with me. What would you think lets in more light? Okay, this is a difficult question, okay? A big hole or a small hole?
Big distance. I would say a big
That's
hole.
not a difficult question. That was a really easy question. I was just joking.
But,
What lets in more light, a big hole or a small hole? A big hole. Just like what lets in more light when the shutter is open for a long time or for a little amount of time? Like you can think of it like this: when I open the door, what lets in more cold air? When the door is open this much, or when the door is open this much? Kind of obvious, yeah? Kind of obvious. What would let in more cold air? When the door is open for 10 seconds, or when the door is open for 1 second? Okay? Let's say that. So now, a big hole lets in more light. We've just learned the first part of that table. Aperture means the bigger the hole. Aperture's relationship. Let's have a go. You fill in the blanks. Aperture's relationship to exposure.
more exposure
The,
there is,
the bigger the hole,
the more light will be let in, and the brighter the picture will be.
perfect. And conversely,
And the smaller the hole, that
which would be something like 1
less
second,
light
like
comes
this is a small hole, yeah?
less light will be allowed to come in, and the darker the picture will be.
Yes, perfect. Everyone heard that? Let's just say it again. The wider the aperture, the bigger the hole. We refer to that as a wide aperture. Makes sense, it's wide, yeah? The bigger the hole, the wider the aperture, the more light comes in, the brighter the image, until it eventually becomes white. The smaller the hole, just kind of like, well, the way I've explained it is, yeah. Yes. But the smaller the hole, the less light, the darker the picture. You realise it's very different, the concept of a big hole and a small hole and a shutter.
Right.
They're two conceptually different things. What?
What is the idea of it?
What's what?
What's the idea of the
We'll talk about it, we'll get there. Okay.
But
Wait, Abigail, go you first, yeah.
When you do zoom and you choose a smaller aperture,
Zoom is not, this is
I
nothing
know,
to
but let's
zoom.
say you have a small aperture, it will zoom whatever is.
No. The way you're asking now a physics question, and this is an important question to answer, but I'm not going to answer it properly, is that the light, the fact that you're dealing with a smaller hole does not affect what you're seeing. The light will still come in a certain way. It does not in any way mean you're cropping the image. You would think that if I've got a big hole, I can see like loads of stuff. And if I've got a small hole, then I can just see a little bit of stuff. It's nothing to do with it. It does not affect your angle of view in any way
How
whatsoever.
does it affect how much light it's allowing in?
Because it's a small hole or it's a big hole. If it's a big hole, it lets in more light. You're thinking a little too hard now. So just think more simple. It's a big hole. You're asking,
Let's
these
say I have
are
a picture,
complex
taking a picture,
physics questions.
and how does it affect how much light I'm allowing in if it's
If it's a smaller hole, you only allow the amount of light in, this amount of light.
where's the image coming from?
The image comes through the lens. The question is, when it comes into the lens, how then does it reflect and come back in? Does it go through a small hole or does it go through a large hole? Okay, that's a physics question. We're not going to get into that. All you need to understand is that the wider the aperture, the more light, the brighter the image. The smaller the aperture, the less light, the darker the image. Very easy. Okay, fine. So now, we have to just remember this, okay? The reason why we spoke about shutter speed first, because it makes a lot more sense. Just as easy, like half of 10 seconds is. Half of 10 seconds is 5 seconds. So we can understand to take away a stop of light from shutter speed is very straightforward. It's just time. So even though it's like more complicated, a 500th of a second, what is it if I take away a stop of light? I'll be off from a 500th of a second.
Take away.
Take away a stop of light.
So we're going down. Do you want it to be darker? So 1,000.
Perfect. Excellent. Good. You have.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Good. Sometimes when we need to. Not sometimes we need to.
Yeah.
Like kind of
You just like see it.
Anyway, so anyway, so we've got shutter. The aperture is now. It doesn't make as much sense as shutter speed. Okay. Okay. And in regards to, do we have to remember these numbers? You don't have to remember them, but it's definitely quite helpful to know the numbers. Your camera will tell you the numbers. The widest aperture. Generally, you pay a lot of money for a wide aperture. A wide aperture is represented by a lower number. Look on page 46. Okay. By the way, we've just said everything what we said here. Look at the top. It says this means the wider the aperture, i.e. the lower the number, the more light is allowed to reach the sensor, the brighter the image. Okay. The narrower the aperture, which is a higher number, the less light is allowed to reach the sensor, the darker the image. Everyone's with me? Yeah. Okay, so now underneath is basically apertures, different apertures labeled. The lower the number, the bigger the hole. Okay, it's kind of, to me it makes sense, and I've said it so many times. But generally at the beginning it's counterintuitive. The lower the number, the bigger the hole. So when I shout out, ladies, what is a very wide aperture? Tell me the number of a very wide aperture. The answer to that question is 2.8. 1.4 is like ultra wide. I have a lens that's 1.8, which is ultra wide. Generally, a very wide aperture would be 2.8. Okay, I've just put extra ones in there for us for argument's sake. Okay, so when I say ladies at a very wide aperture, you will say 2.8. When I say ladies at a very narrow aperture, you will say f22. Okay, even though some cameras, some lenses will go beyond that to like f36 and stuff like that, f22 is considered a very narrow aperture, and f2.8 is considered a very wide aperture. Okay, and there's numbers in between. So look, I'm very sad. I know these numbers. I even know the third stops. You know, people don't usually know this stuff. But it goes from 2.8, then it goes to 4. These are stops. So if you look on this on the numbers, it goes 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22. However, our camera does not go like that. If we click from, your cameras don't have 2.8. If you have a 2.8 camera, your camera will not go click from 2.8 to f4. It will go 2.8, 3.2, 3.5, 4. Just like with shutter speed, our camera does not go from a 1/125th to a 2/50th. It goes 1/125th, 160, 200, 250. 3 clicks for each stop. So too, aperture goes the same way. So when I'm changing my aperture now from 5.6 on my camera, it goes 5.6, 6.3, 7.1, 8. Have a look. Ladies, look at your cameras, be in manual, make sure you're in manual, get your aperture to 5.6. We refer to that in the industry as f5.6. Okay, so get your camera to 5.6. Okay, now ladies, look, now change that number 5.6 to f8. Watch what happens. How many clicks? 3 clicks. Clear? So it goes from f8, so from 5.6 to f8, how many clicks? There's 6.3, 6.3, 7.1, 8. 3 clicks. And then it goes 8, 9, 10, 11. Then it goes 13, 14, 16. Okay? 18, 20, 22. Okay? It goes in third stops. My camera is 20. By the way, the higher the number, no one cares about. You pay thousands of dollars for the lower the number. The higher the number is irrelevant. It's absolutely irrelevant. No one cares about the lower the number. Sorry, the lower the number is in. Sorry, the higher the number. The higher the number, no one cares about. As in, the smaller the hole, if your camera goes to f36, is not a miler. No one cares. However, if your camera goes to 2.8, that makes a big difference. You pay a lot of money for it to go to 2.8. Okay? Any questions?
The F is, okay, this is aperture, is F.
Yeah, look, you see how they represented? F2.8. And your camera probably uses also F. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, Vita, so now there's one little thing I need to explain to you, which is annoying, but we have to understand it. Okay, we're going to understand it very easily and quickly, because a lot of shit. Okay, on your cameras, if you look at the front of your camera, everybody will have the same thing. It will say a number. It will say, like on some of them, it will say 18 to, it will say a millimeter number. Can you everyone just read their millimeter number? What? No. There's another millimeter number. It's 2 numbers actually, the dash in the middle. 18 to 55. 18 to 55. What does yours say? 17 to 70. Yours? You look at the front. Don't touch. 3.5 to 4.5. Okay, it says a number 1 and then a colon. No, look at the front. Oh, you've got to. Okay, say it. It doesn't say that, but the number we're talking about here is from 28 to 80. This number that says, oh, sorry, no. We need to.
Oh, so that's the same as here.
1 second. I got confused. I was saying the wrong thing. I was saying 2 things at the same time. Let's just look very simply. Okay, number 1, there's a number on your lens that has a circle and a line through it. Okay? Your lens, you have a tan on your lens, so it doesn't. There it goes. It says in the bottom there, circle with a line through it. That is the diameter of your lens. So if you want to buy a filter or you lose your lens cap and you want to buy a new lens cap or a new filter for your lens, you will get one that is 58 millimeters. This camera here, 1 second, I put the. So So this camera here, this lens, if you see here it says 77 with the circle and the line through it. Yeah? So this lens cap here, it says 77 millimeters. Okay? It fits on the end here. So yours is 72 exactly. Yeah? And yours is 58, I think. Yeah?
The bigger
Okay.
is it better?
No, not at all. Okay, so that's that number. Then you've got another number, which is your zoom number. Okay, so my camera is written 24 to 105. That means, we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail another time. 24 is how wide the image is. So at 24 millimeters, I am seeing right now, if I shoot at 24 millimeters, I have Rivka on this side of it's Rivka, yeah? If I'm here right now, I've got Rivka's shoulder blade touching this side of the frame, and I've got Abigail's shoulder blade touching this side of the frame. Okay? Whereas at 100 millimeters, I've got Bathsheba in my frame on this side, and the chair over there on this side. You with me? So when I'm at 24 millimeters, I'm like this, and when I'm at 105 millimeters, I'm like this. That's how we talk about it. Doesn't matter. Yeah, no, that's zoomed in. That zoomed out. Different lenses work differently. Sometimes we go like that zooms out.
Does this refer to the range of the zoom 17 to 70?
Yes, that refers to the zoom. So the lower the number, the wider. That means the more stuff I can get in my frame. I have a lens called a fisheye lens. This lens here, which is quite expensive kind of specialty lens, this goes from 8 to 15, which means that 8, when I put it at 8, I will see my feet in the picture. It will be exactly even a little bit more than 180 degrees. It will get my feet in the picture, and it will get above my head in the picture. So if I hold my hand here, that will be in the frame.
Does the image look clear?
Yes, it will be. Well, you could do all kind of funky things like that. Okay, so that number is to do with our zoom. How wide the angle goes, the lower the number, the wider the angle, the higher the number, the more zoomed in. So Abigail has a lens here that is 75 to 300 millimeters. What would this be good for? For something far away, it will zoom all the way in. So if I put this, I would be able to get like one of your eyes to fill the whole frame. 300 millimeters is very zoomed in. Okay, so now.
It's not going to get a wide.
Exactly, 75 millimeters. We just saw 75 millimeters do that, so it's going to be useless under a chuppah, for example. Under a chuppah, I need a very wide lens so I can get in lots of information. Okay, so that lens there would be useless for a chuppah. I've changed my lenses very rarely. I change my lenses incredibly rarely compared to most photographers. But I use 2 cameras. Makes sense. Yeah.
I'm saying if you take picture by one, you're gonna just bring a wide.
So I have this. This is a nice lens because it's a zoom from 24 to 105, which means it's wide. 24 is pretty wide, and it zooms in quite good as well. So
when you're buying a lens, like you want to just understand that you don't. Like for me, I don't want to take pictures of it. So what would it be?
A 24 to 105 is a good lens. This is a good lens to get. This is a 17 to 70. These are by that kind of area with it kind of wide. That's a general kind of lens. Okay, this is a good general kind of lens. This is a general kind of lens which goes from 24 to 85. Okay?
So I think 24 to 20, it's distance this way, not.
24 means how wide it goes. No, it's not. It's measuring. Don't worry about what it's measuring. It's measuring something irrelevant to us. 24. The lower the number, the wider, the more I get in. Okay? The higher the number, the more focused it becomes. You with me?
I am.
Okay.
Lower than actually, you're not zoomed it out at all. So at 17, I will see the biggest frame.
At 17, you'll see the most in your picture. Yeah, the widest frame, exactly. Did you? Okay. So now there's something that you have to know. Okay, and this is just. I just have to explain this seriously a little bit in mind, but you'll understand it as well to show. Okay. When we are zoomed out all the way, and we're at 24 millimeters, we can attain in our cameras the widest aperture. It's a mechanical thing. It's to do with the mechanics of the lens. And if you look on your lens, it will say 1 somewhere. On a Canon lens, it says at the front here. On other lenses, you have to look other places. It says a number 1, and then a colon, and then it will say either 1 or 2 numbers. What does yours say?
3.5 and 5.6.
Okay, and what does yours say? Okay, and yours? 2.8 to 4.5, yours? Yeah? Same, okay. So a lot of people say 3.5 to 5.6. Now this means that your lens is a variable aperture lens. And what does that mean? I'll explain it by my lens, which is a professional lens, which is not a variable aperture lens. My lens says a 1, a number 1, a colon, and then just one number, the number is 4. Now that means that when I am zoomed out, maximum, I'm at my widest angle, which is what, the higher number or the lower number? The lower number. I can achieve an aperture of f4, which is very wide. When I zoom all the way in, I can also achieve an aperture of f4. It doesn't change. Wait. I don't. From what you just said, there's like a word like that. Just stay with me, okay? So my camera has a number 1, a colon, and a number 4, which basically means just the number 4. The 1 is to tell you what it's talking about, okay? It's called a fixed aperture lens. When I'm zoomed out all the way, I can attain an aperture of f4. When I zoom in, I can still achieve an aperture of f4. However, with your cameras, which say...
It will be far, but it will be very wide. Like you're taking...
Now remember the number, the f number has nothing to do with how much or how little you see in the picture. The f number is just to do with how much light we're letting in. Okay, it's not to do with the wide or the narrow... Well, we won't know f all the time. Now you understand what I'm saying. This camera, at 28 millimeters, I can achieve a... One second. At 28 millimeters, I can achieve... That's very strange. I have no idea what that is. It says 3.5 to 5.6. Maybe it's because it's on this camera. That's very strange. Let's just say, anyway, this is going to be an overview. But the point is, this number says 3.5 to 5.6. Don't do this, but cross that number and it just says 4. Okay, I don't know why it doesn't go down to 3.5. I think it's because of the camera. I can wait to try out, but I think it's because of the camera. Okay, so no. So now, on your cameras, when you zoom out all the way and you're as wide as you can possibly be, you can achieve the lower number that's written there. For example, yours, everyone's lower number I think is 3.5. Yeah, 4, whatever, 2.8. Okay. However, when you zoom your camera in, because of the mechanics of the lens, the widest aperture that you can achieve, the number goes up. So look, go to your cameras, turn on to manual, zoom your camera all the way out, which is a higher number or the lower number with the zoom. The lower number. So zoom your camera all the way out and make your aperture the widest. By you it will be 2.8, by you it will be 4, by you it will be 3.5. Everyone sees it? Yeah? Zoom out, you zoomed out all the way? Yeah? Okay. Just touch the button. Okay, you're F4. Okay, you see your number? The widest aperture you can get, so it should be 3.5.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3.5? Now watch what happens, make sure the camera is alive, so just touch the button, and now zoom the lens in slowly and look at that number. Thank you. Goes to 5.6. You saw that? You saw that?
No, it's not telling me that. I don't know.
See it inside.
Inside it says that that's
Yeah, touch it. One
So
second.
you see
Go.
it, but you can see it.
now it's saying inside.
Yeah.
Next to that line, turn it inside, other side.
Just
See that line?
Let me see. Yeah.
Can I just ask you, light?
I don't know why that. Yeah, it could be there's a malfunction in the lens, but I'm not sure. I really don't know. But don't worry about it too
The
much.
light's flashing on -2, yeah, but then when it goes off lens on the flash and it does on the middle, how can I change that? Look, you see that one?
Yeah. Sorry about it.
Just see it?
Yeah. Just look.
Yeah.
Okay. Just do it. Okay. So this number here, where it says a 1 and then a colon and then 2 numbers, is what's called referring to the variable aperture of our lens, which means the wider we are zoomed out, yeah, the bigger the hole we can achieve. the more we zoom in, the smaller the hole becomes. Ladies, you with me? You heard?
No,
Yeah? No? Okay. When you're zoomed out all the way, this number is important because it's going to do your head in when you're like, my lens is like an f4. Why am I only going to get to 5.6? What's wrong? What's wrong? Now you understand is that with this is what a variable aperture lens means. Is that when you're zoomed out all the way, you can achieve the widest aperture that your lens can give you, which in most of it is 3.5 or f4 or 2.8. As you zoom your camera in, that number gets higher, which means the hole gets smaller. Okay, that's it. That's it. It has lots of like nafkaminas as we talk like later on, but you just need to understand because that's going to cause you frustration when you're like, my camera won't go to, and that sometimes it goes to 3.5, sometimes it doesn't go to 3.5. What's going on here? So when you're zoomed in all the way, the widest aperture you can achieve is going to be smaller, a smaller hole, a higher number, than when you're zoomed out all the way. You'll be able to achieve a wider hole. Okay, clear? Any questions until you're clear? Yeah? Straightforward. Okay. That's the most annoying part of the lesson. We just had to understand that. It's explained again in class on page 47. Okay.
This, I'm jumping, but like this +2.
Yeah. Got that. Okay. So now let's just go back through again. What is oh. What is aperture's relationship to exposure? Aperture's relationship to exposure?
The more open it is, the bigger the lens,
No, the bigger the
aperture.
The aperture, excellent. Yeah.
The wider the picture will be, the more
No, not the wider picture. Remember, there's
light
nothing.
you're allowing in, and the brighter the picture.
Exactly, until eventually it will become white. Okay, and the other side, go on, Baha.
Narrower the aperture.
Yeah.
The next side, like covering the darker picture.
Until eventually it goes.
Black.
Okay.
You're dealing with two different things again. You're dealing again with light, and you're dealing with width.
Okay. Just like with shutter speed, you're dealing with light, you're dealing with the length
Right,
of
I'm
time.
saying,
Fine,
right.
same kind of thing. But really, you're dealing just with light. It's just how do we get that light? Do we
How
have a
do I
big
get a
hole?
wide picture and I don't want it overexposed?
A wide picture, as in.
Like, meaning I want it to be as big as I can, but I want
But
the aperture.
you realise that's nothing to do with the zooming.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so you nothing to do with zooming.
Right. It's just
Nothing to do with zooming. Okay. We're going to speak about this. Okay. So now, what is we said aperture's relationship to exposure is the wider the hole, the more light, the brighter the image. And the other side, the smaller the hole, the less light. The darker the image. Sorry? It has nothing to do with zoom.
Right, but if the number does change, if the zoom,
I
you
know,
can't get
but
as high.
it has nothing to do with zoom. The number does not in any way affect what you're seeing.
so it's
The
not the
number,
width.
the
It
aperture.
doesn't affect that.
It's
You're
the
only
size
dealing
of the hole inside the camera, inside the lens, but it is not to do with the zoom. of the camera.
And how do you, right, but how do you change it then if not through zoom?
Automatically changes the zoom.
You through using that. When I said to you, try and get F. When, at the beginning of the class, I said get F. You hold that button down. You do that. That changes the size
So
of the
if you
hole.
zoom in, then you're very close. So you can't get such a low number and get so much bright. So you can manually.
You can manually do F.
No, it doesn't go
Like,
You can't
lower
change it.
number.
Hmm?
If you zoomed in, then the number's
Can
very
you
high.
change the
It's not
F?
very high. It goes a little bit high. It goes the widest you can get to is 5.6. No, but you can still make it much smaller than that.
So you can't. It's not doing it.
Yeah. Okay. You can still change it.
Higher. No, it doesn't go.
It goes
lower
higher.
than 5.6.
That's what I'm saying. When you're zoomed in, the lowest the number goes is 5.6. You can always go higher. It's just when you zoom in. Okay, so you can't open the aperture wider than that. There's other things you can do. You could like have a longer shutter speed, for example. If you want to let more light in, it hasn't stopped you from messing around with your shutter speed. Okay? We've got a bunch of controls that are allowing us to let in and let more light and less light. Sorry? Yeah, that's to do, we'll see that. That's to do with the exposure of the image. You can have a very wide shutter, you can have a very wide aperture, but a very, very quick shutter, very, very quick shutter speed, and that won't be enough light to expose the image. Okay, it's a balance of the two things. Let's keep going forward. Okay, what is aperture's effect. That's aperture's relationship to exposure. Aperture's relationship to exposure, we said, is the wider the image, the wider the aperture, yeah, the more light we let in, the brighter the picture. The smaller the aperture, the smaller the hole, the less light we allow in, the darker the picture. For example, by the way, what's a number for a very small aperture?
5.6 would be smaller than 22.
A very small aperture would be 22. That's the answer to this question, okay? And what's a very wide aperture? 2.8. Okay? 5.6 is wider than very. It's coming in the middle basically, but it's closer to being wide than being very small. Okay? So a very small aperture would be described as 22, and a very wide aperture would be described as 2.8. Let's look here 1 second.
Did you say your camera, no matter the zoom, you can still achieve an aperture of 4?
Say again.
Did you say that has a variable aperture, whereas by zooming you change the aperture, whereas on your lens, no matter your zoom, you can always achieve a 4 aperture?
Yeah.
Why is that an advantage out of interest?
Mine?
Yeah, why is that an advantage that the aperture is not affected by the zoom?
Because I can always achieve a wider aperture.
Right. Is that more expensive? Just in terms of looking for a lens?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I mean, that's not something that at the moment really I would need in a lens. I think
Well,
you pay for it.
yeah, it definitely makes a difference. It definitely makes a
I'm looking into
difference.
this now, so I noticed all your lenses are Canon, specifically by Canon. Why is that the quality of the glass?
I buy
Would you
Canon.
recommend sticking to Canon as opposed to, let's say, a
Yeah.
Sony lens?
Yeah, they focus quicker. You do your homework. They definitely seem to make good lenses and
Can I
stuff.
email you with stuff that I'm looking at your time now?
Let's keep going because we're going to have a camera. We're going to have a discussion of what cameras to buy and what lenses and stuff. Okay, so maybe we'll answer your questions otherwise. But if not, for sure you can send me an email. Okay, so ladies, what is Aperture's relation? So what is Aperture's effect? We've learned. I'm going just in time. I just killed some time because otherwise you'd be lost if I started this now. Okay. We just did a quick huzzah. So now, what is Aperture's effect? We've said Aperture's relationship to exposure is very simple. The bigger the hole, the more light, the brighter the image. The smaller the hole, the less light, the darker the image. By shutter speed, we said the longer the shutter's open for, the more light, the brighter the image. The quicker the time the shutter's open for, the less light, the darker the image. Now, by aperture, the bigger the hole, the more light, the brighter the image. The smaller the hole, the less light, the darker the image. If you like singing, okay? Now, what happens in regards to its effect? Shutter speed's effect is the longer the shutter's open for, the more movement you see. Or the quicker it's open for, the less movement, the more you freeze the action. Okay? Aperture's effect is called depth of field. Okay? Now we're going to add what? Absolutely nothing whatsoever to the colour. Okay? It's like one of the few things it's absolutely nothing to do with. Okay. Thank you. Now we know that it's nothing to do with colour. Okay, so now Aperture's effect is what's called depth of field. Now we're going to add 2 words onto the end of depth of field to have it really clear in our minds. It's very simple, okay, and we're all going to understand it very, very clearly. Very specific. Depth of field of focus. Okay, so we refer to it as DOF, depth of field. That in this school, we're going to, in our mind, add on of focus. Now let's just look very quickly at this. It's very, very straightforward. Let's just...
Is depth of field bokeh? Is that something different?
Depth of field, you can't say depth of field is focus.
Is
But
bokeh?
is bokeh,
Is that the same thing?
depth of field affects bokeh.
It's not the same thing.
No, it's not. Bokeh is an effect that comes from depth of field. Okay. 1 second.
What were the 2 words around this end?
1 second. So depth of field of focus. Now this means.
Before we talked about is where it focuses and then the rest is blurry. Right?
Well, we asked the question. Yeah, we asked the question when we were talking about focus. I said to you, Focus is what? Focus is distance. Now there's a question that you need to ask. Does that mean that if you focus on me here, the door will be out of focus? Or does it even mean that if you focus on my eye here, my nose will be out of focus? What are we talking about? Maybe just the mountains in the background, or maybe much the difference between my eye and the tip of my eyelash. Go on. That's it, right?
Depends on what area you've got as a distance.
That is called depth of field. Okay, nobody else needs to understand that. This, no, not to the zoom. Now, it is related to
So you've got a telescope.
depth of field is what we're using to refer to this idea of how much is in focus. Now you can understand, I could take a picture of you and have Ruth here, Ruth in the back, Ruthie. I could be focused on Abigail here, and Ruthie in the background would be blurry. You can understand that. But now, could it be that I could take a picture of Abigail, have Ruthie in the background sharp, and then have the cameras in the further background to be blurry?
That's how wide it is.
So the question is to do with the aperture. Now look, can you hit the light a second? Now I created this little scenario to explain things. This is my camera. I focus my camera. Oh, sorry. I focus my camera on this little guy in the middle here. Okay? He is 85 centimeters away from my camera. Now is this guy closer or farther from my camera? This guy's closer is, let's say, maybe 82 centimeters, and this guy's probably now like 75 centimeters, whatever, yeah? And this guy's further away. So now, this is what it looked like, okay? This is the camera, and here are the little mentions, the little people. So I can see the speakers, so I say mentions. Okay, so now let's look here. This is taken at f2. Okay, f2 is a big hole, a small hole, by the way. Big hole. F2 gives you a shallow depth of field. A shallow depth of field would be the idea of focusing on my eyeball and my eyelash being out of focus. Okay? F2 is a very, very shallow depth of field. This means that our little guy in the middle is pin sharp because he's the distance we focused on. And now even this guy here, which is just a couple of centimeters closer to my camera, and this guy here is a couple of centimeters further away from my camera, what happens? They're blurry. And they get blurrier and blurrier and blurrier. Now let's just flick all the way through now to F22. Now F22 means this guy is pin sharp, and this guy is also sharp. And this guy's also sharp, and this guy's also, and only here do we even begin to start getting a little bit fuzzy, a little bit out of focus. Let's go in the progression now. So we start at this image here, and let's just keep our eyes on the people. Do you see as I'm flicking through? The aperture is changing. Now it goes there. Let's just start again. Look at the number here. That's F2. That's F2.8. That's F4. That's F5.6. F8. F11, F16, F22, until basically everything is sharp. You with me? Everyone's clear?
What does depth of field actually mean?
Depth of field, that's why we add on of focus. It's the depth of field of focus. When I focused, how much is in focus? Now this is our ability. We have this ability. It's an effect. I can either take a picture of you and have all your ears and the tip of your nose all like pastel and blurred out with the background being completely pastel. Or I could take a picture of you where it would be pin sharp, everything else would be pin sharp, and the background would be very visible. It's an effect. It's an artistic effect that we now have license for. So the focusing point of your depth of field is the middle point. Always. When I focus, what is focus? What's focus? Focus is a distance. Okay? Now my depth of field, if I have a minute depth of field, a very shallow depth of field, which would be what number, for example? F2. A wide aperture, 2.8. 2.8 is a wide aperture. That gives us a very shallow depth of field. That's the word we use to describe that. A shallow depth of field. It's written on page 48. You can write at the bottom if you want. Oh no, it's written there. Shallow depth of field, the fifth one down. So a low number is a big hole. It's also referred to as fast, by the way. But it gives you a shallow depth of field. It's also fast. There's another way people refer to a lens. If they go to a shop and say like a fast lens, it would mean with a wide aperture. It's just like a way of technical way of saying it. Well, the reason why they say fast is because when you have a wide aperture, you can use a faster shutter speed. So it's called fast. Anyway, so the lower the number, the wider the aperture. That means the shallower the depth of field. Which means if I focus, if I've got 3 generations, I've got mummy standing here, I've got grandma sitting here, and I've got little Sarah sitting on the floor in front. Now I've got a wide, I need to get a lot of people in focus here. Now if I'm shooting at f2.8, which is a big hole or a small hole, wide hole, which, wait, by the way, does that have anything to do with Zoom? Okay, so these are just all brand new concepts that we're, brand new, complete new concepts. I have no idea, so it takes to get used to. So I'm at f2 right now. I focused on grandma who's sitting down in between mummy and Sarah. Yeah. So if I focus on grandma in the middle, her face is in the middle place between mummy's face and Sarah's face. But they're both going to be blurry because we're using a very shallow depth of field. As I lift that number higher, so I go from f2.8 to f4 to 5.6 to f8 to f11, now I have increased my, and what are two words we have on the end? Or focus, because they're completely intertwined with each other. That is depth of field. Depth of field is the middle point I'm focusing on, further and nearer to me. Nothing to do with this way. So I can have a group of girls all standing in a long line with their hands around each other and in a perfect line. And I'm standing here. I could be shooting at 2.8 because they're all the same distance. Whereas when I start staggering people, some people come closer, some people come farther, then I can't shoot at 2.8 because I'm going to have a too shallow a depth of field. You with me? Let's look at a few examples. Sorry?
I don't understand why that doesn't affect how much light is coming in.
It does affect how much light. It's the same as shutter speed. But we understand there's two parts to the equation. Shutter speed.
It should be a bright picture. That picture of the grandmother, the mother, and the child, it should be a very bright picture because it's so wide and so shallow.
No, you don't want it wide. You don't want it wide because you don't want it to be shallow. Because we've closed it down because we need a longer depth of field. So you've made a smaller hole.
Let's say I had them both fuzzy and the mother.
You want the, okay, that's an effect. We can have the kid in the front fuzzy and the mother in the background fuzzy and the grandma in the middle sharp. Okay, so now that would be a wide aperture. Does that mean we're letting in a lot of light or a little bit of light? A lot of light. But remember, what about shutter speed?
You're dealing with both at the same time.
Yeah. There's other things as well we're dealing with.
You want it all clear, but then you want it very slow.
Just think about driving. Right now, there's nothing more than you learn how to drive a stick shift. No one knows how to drive a stick shift. In England, you do. Yeah, in England, you do. But you remember that you have to signal when you're changing, and you've got the horn, and you have to like look at your speedometer, and pray. You know, there's other stuff going on. It's not so complicated. But you start off like you can't think of anything more than that, and then all of a sudden you realise that you can also look in your mirror when you're moving. You understand? It does. You do eventually get into that. Okay, so it's the same here. Okay, it's just
but how can it be? You're taking a picture of people here, so you want it wide, so you have to.
Why do you want it wide?
You want it on big focus, right? So
By the way, these words we haven't spoken. I don't know what big focus means.
Sorry.
So
you want what's it called?
I have to be sharp on this because you'll get. We have to be clear on
It
our
actually
terms.
clarifies it a lot because I was wondering, like, why in the world would you need this and shutter speed?
It's going to get clearer and
You
clearer.
need both because
We're going to drop
you
it
have a
in a
wide
second. Well, let's just wait 1 second. So we're going to go
low
on.
number.
No, so you've got a long depth of field because.
A long depth of field. How do I get a long depth of field?
By making it the whole smaller, you need.
Which is, for example, at a number.
22.
Excellent. Okay, good.
And then so you want it brighter, so you put the shutter speed on longer because you want more light to come in. But then the people are moving all over the place.
No problem. Excellent. That's an issue. Good. Okay.
What did you say when you said about keeping it in the middle or something?
The focus point is in the middle. So let's say now we're taking. What?
Let's say you want to focus on the side, not the middle. Let's say there's a picture of everything on the side of the curve, just the edge to be in focus.
It doesn't do everyone. We've just if we want our image to be on the third, like we've decided. Remember how we focus our camera? We hold halfway down and we recompose. It doesn't affect anything. This is the same thing. It's still affected. So when we focus our camera and then move our camera to the side, now that rule of depth of field still exists. It's just now not right in front of us. It's to the side. It's whatever you focused on. You with me?
So you're saying the focus should always be in the middle when you focus.
Well, that wasn't so clear, but yes. You mean on the middle of the distance of what you want focused?
Yeah, the middle
so
of the
if I
frame.
have it, wait, what do you mean the middle of the frame?
When you're looking through the viewfinder, you see
the
that's
whole.
the frame. So you say focus on the middle. Focus in the middle of
The middle
viewfinder.
point.
Is that what you're saying? I'm not
I
sure.
can also put you to the side of my
Yeah,
frame.
that's
If
what
I
I'm saying.
focus and I move to the side, so you're now on the side of my frame.
Right.
You're still locked. The focus is still locked.
Right. But yeah,
And the depth of field now will exist where you are, and also where the middle is. But
Yeah.
that part of my frame,
You
it
show
won't be
us on your
focused.
camera.
Yes, I'm going to show you now. Let's
so
just
you
look
say
at
that
it.
you should always focus in the middle and then move.
I don't know what you mean by the middle.
I don't know,
You
you
mean the
said
middle
the middle
point,
is
the middle
the bar.
focus point?
The middle focus point. Yeah.
We should, as a professional photographer, you should have your camera set to the middle focus point.
Yes.
Not that it's deciding which focus point
Right.
it wants
So
to
that's
use.
what you're referring to. The middle focus point.
The middle focus point is what we're always using,
I
yeah.
understand. Okay. I
Okay?
understand. Is that what you were saying before when you referred to something being in the middle? You referred to that middle focus point.
No. When I'm talking about the thing being in the middle, I'm talking about the depth of field begins from the middle. So when I focus on your eyes, for example, if we've got we've got grandma sitting here, we've got mum sitting on Sarah sitting on the floor. And if I want to get everybody in focus, who will I focus on? Obviously, I need a long depth of field.
The middle.
I'd focus on that's what I'm talking about by the middle
Right.
point. As in the depth of field or focus is the middle point where you focus, your depth of field goes this way and this way.
Right.
So if I wanted to get all of those three ladies in focus, I'd focus on grandma. Because if I was to focus on Sarah, I've wasted some of my depth of field because there's nothing in front of Sarah. Whereas if I was focusing on grandma, then I'm given my maximum depth of field because I'm using that whole distance away from me because it's a distance.
So it builds equally from the middle point. It'll either focus more or less from the middle point.
Well, it's not actually equal, but yeah, you can imagine it is equal. Don't need to understand.
Okay.
Okay, we'll say that. Okay, so now look, for example, let's just look at a few pictures. Abiel, can you hit the light, please? Let's just look at a few pictures using a very shallow depth of field. This is using a very shallow depth of field. Okay? The background has become pastel, so to speak, and our subjects are pin sharp. Now, they're right in the, this is shot at 1.8, yeah, which is a very wide or very small aperture. Wide aperture, which means it's a low number, which means that's a shallow depth of field or a long depth of field. Shallow depth of field. Now, shooting a couple at 1.8 is a big no-no. I've gotten away with it over here, but what's the potential problem? Now look at this. This is a 2.8, which is what? Is that a wide or a narrow aperture? Very wide. 1.8 is ultra wide. 2.8 is very wide. Now, what's the problem with this picture? Look at him. He's fuzzy. Let's look at it even a bigger. Thank you very much. Exactly. So let's just look at this. I've got some perfect examples of this. Perfect example is this was the picture I was learning. This is when I first got the lens, yeah? Now, this picture here, I wasn't aware of this. Now look, he's actually the dad. I won't tell him. This is f2.2. Okay, I've made worse mistakes. Like asking the mother of the bris if she was the grandmother. I don't ask questions anymore. I let them say. I say to them, like, "What's your relationship to them?"
Yeah.
That's the best way of doing it. Okay. Like one time, I asked the guy what he was. I said, "Is this your mother?" And he was like, "No, this is my sister. My mother looks much younger than her." That's what he said. It was really funny. Anyway, so look, I focus. I'm at 2.2. Is that a big hole or a small hole?
A big hole.
Big hole?
2.2 is
It's a
very
wide
high.
hole. 2.2 is a big hole. Yeah?
Very good.
That means I have a shallow depth of field or a long depth of field. Shallow depth of field. Is that a good idea for this picture?
No, there's
Why?
so many people in there.
What's
Not
happened?
exactly
It's not the same distance.
Well, let's take off Uncle Jerry and Dad. Let's get rid of them. Does it work? Let's take off these. Let's take off these people here. Yeah?
Pretty much the
Kind of
same.
works. Pretty much the same distance. However, Dad stood forward quite a way. So look at Dad in this picture. This is a disaster.
Right.
Disaster. That is a disaster. Look at that, pin sharp, beautiful, gorgeous, gorgeous, perfect, pin sharp. That's acceptable. That is unacceptable. And this is a disaster. Okay? So you have to be very careful with your depth of field.
Can you edit that? Meaning make
No.
it change it?
No. Very.
The sharp is not.
Now look at this picture here. Now this is very intelligent shooting because this is actually at 2.5. Is that a big hole or a small hole?
Big hole.
Is that a shallow depth of field or a long depth of field? Ruthie, you look a little confused. Yeah, you clear? Okay. Now, but look at this. What I've done here. Now she's pin sharp, and he's pretty sharp. So what did I do?
You went between the two of them?
I focused on a point, like somewhere right in the middle. Now I've gotten very, very skillful at determining the perfect middle point because we've got our back against the wall. Why? Because we want to have the background as blurry as possible. Generally in portrait photography, the blurrier the background, the better. That's a general rule. That's basically.
The more effective.
It's more. It's just it means that the subject pops out. There's other
The
things.
truth is, our eyes do that too. If I'm looking at her,
Well, your eye actually works in slightly different. Your eye is like a twin moon. It's a little bit different. Your eye.
but that's what I'm seeing. Like, when
If you
I'm
close
focusing
one
on
eye, if you
someone-
close one eye and do it with one eye, it's more effective because when you do it with two eyes, it's a different kind of system. But it's the same idea. It's the same idea. Yeah. So now we've got our back against the wall. What's this dichotomy? What's this? Why have we got our back against the wall in portrait photography when we're taking pictures of groups?
Because if you want a very background but correct different distances, then you
So,
use.
mitzad echad, we want to get the blurriest background. But mitzad sheni, we can't compromise all of our subjects being sharp in focus. You with me? So we need to be constantly trying to use the minimum aperture, the lowest number, the widest hole, the shallowest depth of field, which will allow us just to get everybody in focus.
It's quite a hard thing to think
It's a very skillful thing. You can't imagine. I'm very clear in it in that when I'm taking a picture of one person, what kind of aperture do I shooting on? I've got a lens that goes to 1.8. 1.8. It's only one person. What could be the problem if I'm taking a picture of one person? I'm using 1.8.
maybe their trousers.
Hmm?
If you're very close to them.
What?
A part of them will be blurry.
Well, look, imagine that they're like this. Abigail's, no, let's say Shev's the photographer, yeah? And I turn like this.
The shoulder, one shoulder will be
Forget the shoulders.
You're not in the same
One eye.
One eye is further than the other eye.
Right.
Problem. Depends. There's a famous picture that I have, maybe I'll find it in a second, where it works. But generally, if you're taking a picture of somebody's eyes, you want both eyes in focus. What would I do?
Focus on the nose or something.
Excellent. I would focus on the middle point, which would be the nose. Makes all the difference. All the difference. Okay? Let's have a look. So this image is actually a very good
Would it just
example.
help to make it a drop lower?
Yeah, so you could do that.
Meaning, or a drop higher
Well,
numbers, and then
Good question, good question. Let's just look here 1
and it would
second.
still be blurry in the back, but you still get that clear.
So look at this. Sometimes it's not always the best thing. Like this picture here, we can't really make out the bride and groom in the background. They're a bit too blurry. Whereas this image here, if you see this is 1.8, this is 5.6, which means they're much more in focus, which is the better picture. Let's just go, let's look at this 1 second. But just for example, these kind of pictures here, this is shot at 1.8. Now the whole beauty of this picture is contained in the fact that the eyes are pin sharp.
And his payers are actually a little bit blurry.
Absolutely, and the tip of his nose you can't see it because it's blurred anywhere because it's just flat. But the tip of his nose is also blurry, and his payers, his eyes, the edge of his eyebrows is also blurry. Okay, these kind of things. This is a perfect example of depth of field. We're focused there. That goes. The further it goes, because depth of field is completely linked to what? Distance.
You can very clearly see that.
So this is exactly how it works. This is
so
one
narrow. When you focus,
because I'm at 1.8.
That's a
I'm
really
at
good
1.8.
example.
Your lens can't even go close to 1.8. Not even close to it. Look at this. This is quite interesting. You see here, the veil is what got in focus, and in the background, she is blurry. Okay. This is my wife, her eyes here. If you actually look at this, it's very interesting. The bridge of her nose actually is in focus. I missed her eye. Her eye is slightly soft. The bridge of her nose and her eyebrows are in focus. I missed the focus. Sorry? I missed it. I focused on the wrong place.
You focus on the nose.
I focused on her eyebrow instead of her eye. You with me?
Yeah, but then it must be also that your actual focus distance wasn't very big. The actual distance of
I don't know what focal distance is.
That's right. The depth of field was
Depth of field was minute. Yeah, it was. This image was shot at 1.2. That was a lens that I borrowed, which was like a $3,000 lens. I actually bought it and took it back. It was $3,000. It was like $2,500, and I was going to keep it. It was for other reasons it wasn't worth having. But that's 1.2 is basically the widest aperture you can get. My regular lens is 1.8. This was 1.2. That means that I just missed the focus. I got perfectly focused on her eyebrows, and I missed her eyes just.
The reason why the bridge of the nose and the eyebrows both focus is at the same distance.
Same distance, exactly the same distance. Okay, so now, there's also just the example of long focus. This is at long depth of field. This is shot at f10, which means, if you look here, his eyelash is pin sharp and his face is very sharp, and the bride is also sharp, and the hand is also sharp. That is a long depth of field. This is also a long depth of field. We're shooting f9, which means I've got the guys in the front and the guys in the back sharp, which means also the buildings in the background are also sharp.
Why? Was there any way to achieve the
You weren't
people sharp
looking
in
for
the
that
background? Is there a way to achieve that?
Not really. There is in post, but not really.
Right.
She asked, is it possible, just like, for example, this picture here, if I wanted everybody in focus, could I have everybody in focus and the background blurry? The answer basically is no. Okay, so now these pictures, a lot of architectural pictures, are taken with a very long depth of field because you want everything sharp. I want the beginning of this picture here, the light switch is sharp, and I want everything to the end of the picture sharp. So I want to be shooting at f20. This picture here is also f20. I want everything sharp. There's not going to be any benefit of having things blurry and things sharp. I want everything
you
sharp.
have something sharp this way, like just straight into the picture. And not distance this way, distance that way.
I'm not with you.
That you've got the sides sharp and the middle sharp and the sides are very big.
If it's the same distance from you,
So not distance this way, but distance this way. It's not really the same distance.
if it's very simple. I don't understand what you're saying, but I can explain to you. If you're focused on the distance of 2 meters, everything that is 2 meters from you will be sharp. Everything that is further or closer to you will not be sharp.
Right, so you can't have.
Understand? You answered your question, yeah? Top. Okay. Top. So look at this image here. I'm sorry, because there's more I need to get through, so we just need to keep going. This image here, what do people think of this picture?
It's
What?
really parsley is what's focused.
This is a better picture. If I was making this bar mitzvah, I would rather have this picture of the food than this picture of the food.
How did you not get the reflection of the camera in the bowl?
You can actually see. You can see, actually, I did. That's my assistant. That's me. There's my camera. It's just on a funny part of the bowl. Just on a. Now this image here. This is a good example. This is a good example where I'm using a very small aperture. F11 is a small aperture, and I'm using this small aperture to try and capture the maximum depth of field, because I've got a little boy standing against the wall in the back. He's probably a metre away from these girls. So where did I focus? Where did I focus? I focused on a point in the middle, exactly.
How do you adjust your aperture on your camera?
You did before, you begin the class, you press that button and you...
During the wedding, you from picture to picture changing your aperture.
Yes, yes, yes. Aperture is the most effective. Let's very quickly, I was going to explain to you this, that using a very small aperture also creates what's called a starburst effect. Okay, this is a very, look, this is f22. This is the opposite of what? What's starburst the opposite of? Bokeh. Bokeh is the opposite of starburst. We'll see that in a second. This is starburst. This is just a completely different side. This is a very small point. Is that the smaller I make my aperture, this is f22. Is that a small aperture or a big aperture? Small aperture. It creates this kind of really cool starburst effect, like this picture here, f22. This picture here, f22. These pictures are basically out of the camera. This picture here, f22. This picture here, f18. Okay?
That's a really cool effect.
Look at the difference between these two pictures here. That's f4 and that's f18. Look at this. This is f5.6 and this is f20. Same picture.
And it's all done on the camera.
Yes, all of this is done on camera, nothing to do with post. Nothing to do with post. This is my assistant standing up here holding the light. Look, here he is.
That's so cool.
Okay?
But you know how
It's the very opposite effect of the star.
It's the exact opposite effect of bokeh. Now, bokeh effect is something that people are really looking for.
Yeah.
See these circles here. Now, as I minimize as I widen my aperture, which means a low number or high number, a wide aperture is a low number or high number? Low?
No. Yeah.
A wide
very
aperture.
wide
It's a low number, fine, good. Okay, it's good, yes, so this is very good. That just got it a little bit further in. The lower the number, the wider the aperture, the shallower or the longer the depth of field. Shallow the depth of field. One of the things that shallow depth of field does when you're dealing with points of light is it turns points of light into balls. This is called bokeh. This is called bokeh effect. B-O-K-E-H. Bokeh. Okay, now
That's
just...
only if you've got lights, like not the whole places.
It's talking about points of light. Points of light. Points of light. Now, I just want to explain one other thing, okay? Everyone's clear? There's any questions? I think we're all clear, no? Okay? What is aperture's relationship to exposure? Quick, come on. Aperture's relationship to exposure.
The more exposure into light is brighter.
The more light, yeah, you're right.
And the less
The light of the image. Go on, the other side.
the less depth there will be.
Wait, no, just aperture's relationship to exposure. Taylor, go on. Aperture's relationship to exposure. Yeah. Oh, that's a big number or a low number? A big number, smaller the whole, yeah. Less light, the darker the image. Bracha, the other side of that equation, which we usually say first, but I'm giving it to Taylor. The wider the hole, high number or low number? Lower number, for example, 2.8, yeah. Yeah, go on. Wait, you didn't talk about effect yet. It's just talking about exposure, relationship to exposure. Two separate things. You're going to really appreciate that I've thrown it to you in this way eventually. Okay? The bigger the hole, the more light, the brighter the image until it gets white. Go on back, show me the other side.
Smaller the hole, the less light comes in.
Excellent. Okay, Ruthie, what's its effect? What's aperture's effect? What's it called first? Yeah. Depth of field. What are the two words we add on the end to make it more understandable? Depth of focus. Well, how does that make it more understandable?
So, if you have a wide aperture, you have a lower number, so I think 1.4.
Wait, just remember, what's when we give our paradigm wide aperture, what do we say?
Oh,
2.8.
Okay.
2.8, yeah?
Okay, the more you have a focus, the blurrier everything is.
What's it got to do with focus?
You have one thing to focus and everything else is blurry.
Everything else?
Well,
Wait, go on, everything what?
in relative to distance.
everything that's a different distance will be out of focus. So give me the example of a picture which would be a very, very shallow depth of field. Describe that picture to me quickly. Shallow depth of field.
You have one person and everyone else around it is blue.
Okay, fine. Give me a good example of a minute depth of field, a shallow depth of field.
Between the eyes and the nose.
Excellent, perfect. And then give me an example of Abigail, an example of a picture where you would maybe want a very long depth of field.
It would be a smaller hole.
Smaller hole.
Everything would be very clear.
So, for example, like what kind of photography would I be using a shallow depth, a long depth of field for?
A group.
Okay, yeah, but what would I be using a really long depth of field for?
Distance.
So what kind of photography would I be using a very long depth of field for? I want everything in focus. Landscape, or what did we look at? Interior or architectural photography, where you want everything in focus. Okay, now I just need to explain something quickly. We're running out of time. We've done very well. We're 2 classes ahead of usually how you understand this now, which is great. Okay, is that your zoom also affects your depth of field. That means that my camera, let's just say on f4, my camera is different than my lens is different than your lens, because at 24 millimeters, which is very wide, I could be at f4. I zoom in all the way, I could also be at f4. This is called a non-variable lens. Your lenses, everybody here without exception, have what's called a what? A variable aperture lens, which means what? Just very quickly, go on, say it quick. Yeah, you know, go on. When we're at the widest, zoom, we can achieve what? The biggest aperture, the widest aperture. The lower the number. As we zoom in, that aperture changes slightly to a higher number. Okay?
So you can't zoom in, let's say, an hour lens, you can't zoom in and just focus just on one eye or something.
Let's say. Yeah, there's other things, but what you're saying is for everything that you've learned right now, it's 100% correct what you just said. Perfect. That as you're zooming in, you're compromising your minimum depth of field, because as I zoom in, the lowest aperture that I can achieve, the widest aperture, the lowest number, actually goes up a little bit. Now, what you need to know this is very important, okay, is that the more you zoom in, the shallower your depth of field becomes. Which means, if I'm taking a picture, we'll go through this in the next class in more detail again. Okay, but if I'm taking a picture at f4, and I'm zoomed out all the way, yeah, my depth of field might be, I could get the whole table in focus, even at f4 when I'm zoomed out. Whereas when I zoom in, it could be that my depth of field becomes, my depth of field becomes much shallower. Your focal length also affects depth of field. It does not affect, that's why I'm trying to create a difference between effect and relationship to exposure. Your zoom does not have anything to do with the exposure, but your zoom does affect the depth of field. Let's just see a very quick example of this.
How much depth of field you can get?
Watch this 1 second. Here, look at this. This picture was taken. Oh, this is me going closer as well. It's the same idea as going closer, but just look. See these balls?
Yeah.
Do you see how they get bigger?
I would say that would be like a higher depth, like a wider, shallower depth of field.
It's a shallower depth of field, but you have to remember that we've said aperture. Its relationship to exposure is what we said. And its effect is depth of field. But there's other things that also affect depth of field. So although aperture affects depth of field, there's other things like how close I am to the subject. The closer I come to you, yeah, the more out of focus Ruth is going to get. The further I come from you, the more in focus you'll get. So my distance to you also affects my depth of field. Zooming out and zooming in also affects depth of field. We're going to go more into that in the next class.
Or it's called the lower numbers.
Sorry?
The bokeh thing?
The bokeh is in the lower numbers for sure.
Bokeh refers to those balls of light.
Yes.
So you said that the more you zoom, the more shallow depth of field you get. Is that what you said?
The more you zoom, the more shallow
I
the
don't
depth of field.
understand that because when you zoom, you actually get your aperture numbers get bigger.
Okay, that's a perfect question that you asked. The question is now, what's better? To zoom in with a higher aperture number or to zoom out with a lower aperture number? Everybody heard that contradiction? We've got a contradiction on our hands according to what we just learned about the variable lens. Because we just learned that the more you zoom in, the shallower your depth of field becomes. But we know that on your lens, as you zoom in further, your number goes up a little bit. So the answer to that question is your zoom is more important. You get a shallower depth of field when you're zoomed in at 5.6 than when you are zoomed out at 3.5. We're going to go into that in the last class. We're going to go into. Okay,
so does that mean on this image, if you would zoom in, the bokeh would get bigger?
Yes.
The light would get bigger.
Okay, excellent.
So
Go back through this class. Okay, I've written it all out for you. Okay, everything should be understandable. We just learned a lot. Oh, come in as well. This is 5 minutes fast. Okay, come in. Stop taking us in. So look, please go back through it all again. We've just learned a huge amount. Okay, I think we understand how much we learned. Yeah. You'll forget it by next class if you don't go back through it, okay? It's all written here, everything's written here. You will be really inspired by how much you understand all this, okay? Try explaining it to your husbands or to your brothers and sisters or to whatever it is, because that will help you get it clearer and you will realise how much you actually just learned, okay?
this is the homework we should do.
So homework for class 4. By the way, I've written it here. I hope it's the right way around. On page. Yeah, so this is backwards. Everybody, page 51 there's a big typo, a really, really annoying typo. Page 51. Everyone see what the typo is in the table. The wide aperture, which is a low number, it's backwards. Okay, that is a really severe typo. Okay, it's wrong. You understand? Ruth, you understand? Yeah. Okay, so just flip that around. Now, when we put our camera onto AV, we've been using our camera on TV. When we put our camera onto AV, now the camera, we're in control of our aperture, and the camera is in control of our shutter speed. No, our shutter speed. Unless you put it in water.
So if we want to take these pictures, we should take them on AV setting?
Yes. So now, I'm not going to go through it. It should be quite understandable. I'm just going to turn it off.
Page 52 is there.
Goodbye. In a second, let me just stop